Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to BPI Chat today. My name is Alexandra Maloney and I am your host as well as a BPI board member. I hope everyone is staying safe and lifted during these times. The purpose of this series is to share the experiences and insights of members of the international affairs community and hopefully inspire the next generation to explore opportunities in this field. Also, the thoughts and views of our guests are their own and do not reflect the views of BPIA. We are currently streaming live, and this talk will be posted on our IGTV and our YouTube channels afterwards. And if you haven't already, please follow Black Professionals in International Affairs on Instagram, which is at IABPIA, as well as our guest speaker, whose handle can be found on their flyer on our page. And lastly, we encourage viewers to chime in below in the thread with comments and questions that you may have as we continue this conversation. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker for today. Mr. Danny Ryan has professional experience in the consulting world and working for international organizations. Previously, he was a consultant at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, headquarters in Paris. Danny is passionate about promoting the OECD resources, information, as well as connecting with fellow young professionals to swap guidance and advice. He received his BA in European Business and Intercultural Communications from the Hague University of Applied Sciences and is currently a communications officer with the OECD in the Washington Center. So thank you so much, Danny, for joining us.
Alexandra, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Slightly gray and dreary here in DC, so this definitely sort of brightens up the day.
Yes, so the OECD are friends of BPIA, so we are so happy and excited to have you on and to hear more about the organization, some of the key areas that you all are connected to, as well as your professional experience. So my first question to you, I'd like to start off by asking how's the current COVID-19 situation affecting the work that you do?
Well, great. Well, first, thank you again for having me on. The OECD and fundamentally what we do is we have 36 member countries. We also work with many other countries as strategic partners. One of the main things that we are doing now, and our main goal as the OECD, is to support our member countries, whether it comes to trade, policy, economics, finance, environment, agriculture. We take and provide them with data and analysis that we have done in headquarters, and we try and sort of guide them and support them. So COVID-19, and anyone can view the OECD.org/coronavirus. It's our COVID-19/coronavirus web portal, which contains the most pertinent data in relation to COVID-19, whether it be health statistics, economics, as well as the latest sort of working papers and analysis. So what we are trying to do is study and research and provide guidance to our member countries and indeed non-member countries for them to allow them to make the best choices when trying to battle this pandemic.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you have other information about the OECD? How did you get connected there? And can you share more with us about the work that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with the OECD now for 2.5 years. I was very fortunate to begin as an intern. You mentioned my studies in The Hague. Part of my program, I had to do a sort of 5-6 month internship. And I was sort of lucky that it was the final thing I had to do. And I was fortunate enough to get a position in the Public Affairs Communications Directorate, PAC, one of many acronyms I had to learn along the way. I was started off as an intern, promoting as a sort of marketing intern, promoting OECD iLibrary, OECD Data Portal to primarily academic institutions around the world. I was there for 5-6 months, and then I became a consultant or a contractor for about a year. And all this time, so about 8 months. And all this time was in Paris, which isn't the worst city in the world to live in. So that's sort of how I got into the OECD. I was quite fortunate to begin there. And then I was called into my manager's office one day, and there was a position that had opened up in the OECD Washington Center. They wanted someone who, I suppose, had some sort of knew the sort of systems and platforms and They thought I'd be a good fit, so I accepted the offer and moved to Washington D.C. October 7th, 2018. So I was 1 year in Paris, and then I've been here for 1.5 years in the OECD Washington Center. And in Paris, we're 3,000 people. We actually have two offices, so to speak. We've got two headquarters in Paris. So 3,000 people in communications and policy, and of course the delegations to the OECD, to 10 people here in the OECD Washington Center, plus interns. So it was quite a flip. And I've been here for about 1.5 years now, working in the OECD Washington Center.
Thank you for sharing that. And some of our viewers are, college age or young professionals. Could you share what exactly the OECD is in kind of layman's terms and in, perspective to the international system, and what role that it has and function that it has in the international system?
Absolutely. Well, I think the most important thing or interesting thing for certainly US young professionals is to know that the US, along with Canada, were founding members of the OECD. The OECD sort of came out of the Marshall Plan post-World War II. It was set up to guide and support European governments to work closely together to rebuild the economies. And then the US and Canada joined in, I believe, the 60s. Don't quote me on that, I should know, but I don't know the exact date, but they did eventually join. So that's, I think, the most important thing for certainly US audience to know, is that the US founded this organization. It has now grown. I think at the beginning it was about 6 countries. It has now grown to 36 member countries, as I mentioned earlier, as well as non-member countries that we work with. We're primarily, in a way, we're kind of like, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with NATO. We're sort of like an economic type. We are providing our member countries with economic analysis, data, policy formulation. That's our goal. An example of which I think is quite well known as PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. That comes out of our education directorate. Every 3 years, this is a major report that comes out. It's essentially an exam that takes place around the world on maths, science, and reading. And it essentially ranks countries' education, and it sees who's doing well, who's doing not. And this, while what the OECD does perhaps isn't legally binding, it does set a bit of a benchmark. And people might be familiar with the terms of OECD countries, OECD standards. That's what the OECD tries to do. It tries to set standards. It tries to set sort of common policy frameworks for market-driven economies, to enable countries to do better, whether it's in trade and exports, whether it's in education, whether it's in environment. Recently, we've developed, the OECD has a blockchain center. So looking at issues like blockchain, there's also issues around cybersecurity. So that's kind of what the OECD does. It essentially supports its member countries with data, with policy analysis, to help them create better policies that will enable their economies to grow, that will bring better well-being to their citizens, to try and set sort of common standards and frameworks around the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I'm also learning more about things in this space too. So I'm really grateful that you're here to speak to us. For the new viewers that have just joined in, we're here with Danny Ryan, who is a communications officer with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And he's just sharing more about the OECD, as well as his experience and his background in the consulting and international organization space. So if you have any comments or questions, then please feel free to add them to the thread below, and I will do my best to ask those questions. So Danny, my next question for you is more about your personal interest in the field and international field. So what has sparked your interest in this field?
I think it probably goes back to when I was a kid. I mean, every morning the radio would be on. My parents would be listening to the news. Every evening at 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. would be the news. I'm from Dublin. I should probably Dublin, Ireland, as you might be able to tell from my accent. So there was always, and every Sunday there was a stack of newspapers about yay big. that my parents were consuming. So from an early age, I was exposed to news and politics. In Ireland, we have secondary school, which is 6 years. So you go when you're sort of 12, 13 to 18. And the school I went to was 45-minute train out and 45 minutes back. And every morning,
Wow.
I was reading. You got a free newspaper. So I would read that out of boredom, front cover to back cover. But for 6 years, I was, every day looking at news and politics. So that age, I was always, already sort of curious. Upon completion of high school, I took a year out. I worked in event management and marketing, nothing to do with the field of international affairs and development, but again, reading and consuming news all the time. And when I was 20, I moved sort of within the space of learning about an opportunity. 3 weeks later, I moved to the Netherlands. I took up a degree in European business and international affairs at the University of Applied Sciences. I spent 4 years there. I was quite active in college, and also both in college and outside of college. I set up the Political Engagement Society. I was co-founder of a drama society. We were obviously doing, discussing EU affairs. And what was particularly interesting as well was my college was quite, international. So obviously there were debates and discussions and different viewpoints on certain topics, which happens, in the US, it can happen with people who are all from DC, but when you're interacting with people from very different cultures to yours, very different backgrounds to yours, it makes it just a little bit more interesting. So my 4 years there, and again, I was an early subscriber to the Politico newsletter. I was constantly consuming news. And I think that's kind of just over the years, there's just been a continuum. I've always kind of gone back to reading about international affairs, what's going on in the world, primarily through, I would say, my parents, first and foremost, and then just having that early exposure. And then 4 years in college, where I was allowed to not only study it, but also kind of practice it in a way by putting on events and going to Irish embassy events and meeting diplomats and learning more about their work. So I think that's probably what had sort of sparked my interest. There was no one particular thing. I think it was just an accumulation of constantly being sort of around and absorbed in that world from a young age, as I said, with my parents, to college, to even particularly now when I'm much more sort of in the system, so to speak.
Thanks for that, Danny. So the questions are coming in. For those who are just joining, we're here with Danny Ryan, who is a communication officer with the OECD. And the first question I see here is, Danny, if you could elaborate on work from the OECD related to renewable energy and the environmental world. So Danny, if you have any comments on that, or feel free to direct, because I know that this may not be something that you directly work on. If you want to point this person in the right direction in terms of where to find more information from the OECD on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say that just a disclaimer, whenever I meet someone and I say I'm from the OECD, I am not a policy analyst. I'm not a statistician. I am not an economist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm strictly a communications professional. But in terms of the environment, the OECD does have an environment directorate. It does a tremendous amount of work, as well as there's the International Energy Agency, which is sort of part of the OECD but acts somewhat independently. But primarily, we have the environmental directorate. And in terms of if anyone's interested in finding out whether it's work of the OECD in environment or indeed anything else, one of the fantastic resources we have is the OECD iLibrary. So www.oecd-iLibrary.org. There you can find all our reports, our working papers, our statistics. It's broken down by theme. So theme, environment, you'll be able to see all the work that the OECD does in that particular sort of field, as well as others. So yes, the OECD does do environmental renewable energy work, and for those interested, also the directorate has its own sort of web page, so oecd.org/environment. There, any individual can sort of find the work of the OECD in relation to environment.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to give a quick shout out because I see some BPI members and board members on. Hello there to Vannery Kong and to Otis Holloway, both who are also speakers connected to this BPI chats. So just giving a quick shout out to you all. The next question from a viewer is, can you describe, I'm trying to scroll back up to see it, but the question was asking, can you describe a typical day of what a normal day of work would look like for you pre-COVID-19?
Oh, okay. Good question. Before all this, what I really enjoy working, one of the things I love working about, particularly in the OECD Washington Center, is, we're small. We're 10 people. Our sort of role, we're part of the Public Affairs Communications Directorate. So we are, there's intelligence gathering, there's reporting back to headquarters. I would say sort of 50% of our work is output. So that's newsletters, that's putting on events, that's reporting back to headquarters in Paris. I would also say the other 50% is acting as a service. We regularly have high-level officials, whether it's the Secretary General, our Chief of Staff, and Sherpa to the G20, directors. When they come to town, everyone in the office has sort of a portfolio. So my colleague Miguel, for example, has the Economics Directorate, the Education Directorate. So when one of the people from there are coming into DC, he and we will sort of schedule meetings. We will support them in any way, shape, or form. We'll provide briefing notes. We'll put on special events for them. If they request that, we might propose events for them to do. Or we make them a nice cup of coffee in our office if they just want to take a breather and do some work. So no 2 days were the same. I know everyone sort of says that. And, yeah, there were, every day there were sort of, 10 things that we had to do as part of the job. But one of the things that remains quite enjoyable working in Washington Center is the fluidity of the work, and also the multiple stakeholders that you're working with. I remember around this time last year, I remember getting the office. We got a late night tour of the White House, in particular the West Wing of the White House. The next day, I was at the museum here in DC for an internship fair for Howard University. On Sunday, I flew to Texas for South by Southwest. Obviously, that doesn't happen every week. I wish it did. That'd be quite a fun, fun job to do. But I've got to interact with private sector. I've engaged with civil society organizations such as yours. I've worked with youth groups. I've worked with academia, think tanks. So really, it's every day. It was there was reporting. There was sort of 10 things we had to do. There were newsletters. There were presentations that we were giving to universities to promote OECD online resources, some of which I've mentioned, and also acting as a service to experts and directors and secretary generals when they would arrive into town. We would look after them. So that was pre-COVID-19. Now, as you can probably imagine, we're all working from home. This is my beautiful bedroom that I'm working from and dressed somewhat casually. Our role now is, it's a lot of reporting. It's understanding, it's updating headquarters on policies being enacted by the administration, by Congress, interesting tidbits we're picking up in the news. It's a lot of reporting. We're putting on more. We're trying to put on more webinars. This I consider a webinar. It's Insta Live, but it's still a webinar. In a couple of weeks, I'll be hosting another webinar with one of our experts from Paris. We've got another with the American Library Association that we're doing. So we're trying to be kind of creative, and yes, there's a lot of reporting, and sort of between 9 and 12 in the morning every day, we're slammed and sending emails and reporting back. The afternoon is when we get a little bit of a breather in a way to try and be creative and come up with social media content to put out. Our primary focus right now, indeed, throughout the Public Affairs Communications Directorate, is to get people onto the OECD.org coronavirus web portal, COVID-19. That's, in a way, that's a crucial thing for us right now, is to get stakeholders and policymakers onto that portal to see the latest data and analysis that the OECD is providing in order to hopefully enable them to make better decisions when creating policies around COVID-19.
Thank you so much for answering that. Hi, for those who have recently joined, we're here with Danny Ryan, who is a communications officer with the OECD. We have another question here from the audience that asks, can you talk about the best ways to get involved with the OECD, coming from a recent master's graduate?
A recent master's graduate. I suppose the number one thing that I would advise for this person is to really do your homework. The OECD, And I say that both do your homework for the OECD and also sort of the international organizations. The OECD is big, it's 3,000 people. There's, you know, I don't know what this person has a master's in, but, you know, not only are we looking for statisticians and also, you know, policy analysts, we're also looking for, you know, IT people, we're looking for human resources, we're looking, you know, communication professionals. So first sort of understand what it is that, you know, for this person I would advise, you know, what is it that you've done your master's, what are you interested in? Then do your research, do your homework, look at the OECD, see if we cover the policy area that you're really interested in. See if, you know, if you're an IT professional or whatever it is, see if there are openings. There are a few sort of programs that we have. We have the internship program, which won't be available to the master's graduate. The internship program is for students currently enrolled in a bachelor's, master's, or even a PhD program. We do have the Young Associates program, the Young Professionals program. I believe the Young Professionals program is on a bit of a pause, but the Young Associates program, I believe applications closed a few months ago. There's also the vacancies, OECD.org careers at the OECD. But I think what's most important before looking at some of the programs that we have to sort of enter the OECD and begin a career is to really kind of study the OECD and understand its origins, understand its role in international organizations. I mean, our office is right beside the World Bank and the IMF. These are two other, you know, big organizations. So understanding the role of the OECD and understanding its role in the world of international organizations, that would be my best advice first and foremost. And then look at career options, look at what is available right now, look at potentially applying to one of the Young Associates or Young Professionals programs, and even potentially applying to one of the jobs in our career page.
Thank you for that. We have another question here that asks, what's the biggest challenge you faced in your work at the OECD so far? And I'll also extend that question to say, you know, in your professional journey. So what has been a challenge that you've overcome, and what strategies did you take to overcome that challenge?
I think the biggest challenge for working for the OECD was going from, you know, so as I mentioned earlier, you know, I just mentioned it too in your homework, you know, I went from headquarters, 3,000 people in lovely Paris, to the 10 people office here in Washington. And, you know, in Washington, and particularly in the office, we're encouraged to go to events, we're encouraged to go out, to network, to meet. What was a challenge for me was actually myself having to do my own homework. You know, when you're in headquarters, you come in, you do your work, you do learn a lot about the organization. But when you're you know, in DC and you're meeting people and you're giving out the business card, it's really important to know the kind of, you know, top 3 bullet points. What are the priorities of the organization? What is the role of the OECD Washington Center? Sort of in a way having an executive summary for sort of different sort of policy areas, which is again why we have people who cover portfolios, because it'd be impossible to know everything that's going on in all the directorates and all the policy areas that we cover. So my colleague Michaela, for example, covers trade and agriculture. So she, again, is not a policy analyst for the Trade and Agriculture Directorate, but she knows quite a lot about what's going on, what's coming out, reports that are going on. So that was a challenge for me, was really understanding, you know, what are the main, because as you can probably imagine, you know, talking to, you know, a French person or a European person and communicating the value of the OECD is different to talking to someone from the US. You know, and also the Washington Center covers Canada, so speaking to a Canadian about the values of the OECD, what are our priorities. So that was, I suppose, a big learning curve for me, was actually getting a lot more into the weeds of the OECD and understanding the work and the sort of makeup and you know, what's our role in all this and all the international affairs. And I would say how I overcame that was, one, my own, you know, work, but also more importantly, were my colleagues here in Washington Center. A lot of them have been working here for a number of years. They really know their stuff. They know the directors they cover. They know Washington as well, which is a different beast entirely. And they've been fantastic in providing. So when I moved over, within the first, you know, few weeks, you know, I was scheduling meetings with them and saying, like, you know, what do you say, you know, when you meet someone, whether it's a student who wants a sort of general overview, to perhaps a government official, to perhaps someone in the think tank world, in academia, a professor. understanding the kind of different sort of points that you make to each audience, because each audience is going to receive information differently. So thankfully, I've had terrific colleagues who have supported me and guided me and provide me with the bullet points to know. And also, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, acting as a service, we have our experts in town. We get to chat with them and we get to learn, hey, what's going on in your directorate? Who are you meeting? What work is upcoming? That's also been incredible. In Paris, that doesn't happen, but in the Washington Center, because if we make you a coffee, I think we get to ask you a question about your work and what you're doing. So that's also been great, and being able to participate in events with them and set them up to get a more deeper understanding of their policy area as well. So that's been how I overcame that initial challenge, and particularly when you're communicating with Washington D.C. folk, where you really have to know your stuff. You really have to, because everyone's scrambling for attention. You really have to know your 3 to 4 main talking points. Make sure you know them effectively. And another thing that I would say was a challenge to overcome was, I think the most important thing as a communications person working at somewhere like the OECD or an international organization is know when to say, I don't know the answer to that. Give me your details, your contact information, and I will find you the answer. They know you're a communications officer. They know you're not a statistician and an economist. They know that. You might know this kind of structure and some reports that are coming out. But I think another aspect of, is really know when to, in a way, just be quiet and know when to say, I don't know, give me your card and I'll get you the information. And 10 times out of 10, they say, great, thank you so much. So that was another learning curve for me moving over here. Not that I pretended to be an economist or anything like that, but sort of being in that position where I'm like a bit taken aback, saying and thinking, panicking, I don't know what the answer to that. Being able to say, hey, you know what? Give me your details and I'll get the answer for you. So that's been a couple of things that were challenging at the beginning. I definitely haven't mastered them. I've definitely got a lot better. Still working on them with help from my colleagues. But those were a couple of things that I had to overcome when moving to Washington, D.C.
You could have fooled me. Thank you so much. I agree. Those are some really good strategies to use, especially for folks who are in the international organization space or interested in this space, where some of the things we're working on are evolving, right? So there may not be the exact answer in that moment. So thank you for sharing that strategy there. So the last question that I have for you, and feel free to add any concluding thoughts to this question as well, but what advice do you have to give to someone who is interested in considering this type of work or this line of work with international organizations or consulting?
Good question. I would say, earlier I said for the person who asked you about OECD, do your homework. And that goes for whether you want to work at the OECD or whether you want to work at the IMF, World Bank, United Nations. It's really do your homework. In the past, I've gotten messages from people who say they're interested in careers at the OECD. I say, fantastic, happy to talk. What are your interests? What are you good at? And they'll say, well, I'm interested in economics and development. That doesn't really do a lot for me. That you have to be a lot more specific. So I'd say that anyone who's interested in working in international affairs is first and foremost, do your homework, know the role of international organizations. You don't need to know the absolute histories and the key dates, but it is good to kind of have a good understanding of what the purpose of this organization is and how they work in the international realm. I'd also say from a personal perspective, this is something that I wish someone had told me, and what I just said about the person, anyone who has an interest in international affairs has a lot of interest. They read a lot of news, they watch a lot of media, they're super interested. I think it's really important to know what you're good at, particularly in the communications realm. In the Public Affairs and Communications Directorate, for example, we have public affairs and media, we have events, we have impact monitoring and evaluations, we have partnerships, we have many themes within that. So if you're able to look in the mirror and say, in college I was writing for the college newspaper, or once a month I hosted a podcast on whatever topics it is. If you're able to have definitive skills, if you have definitive skills, whether it's in social media, whether it's in WordPress, HTML, coding, whether it's writing, whether it's events and putting on events, really kind of understand what you're good at, because you will have a much bigger impact at that organization, because you are going to, people will hire, particularly the OECD, when you're hired as an intern, you're not fetching coffee or photocopying stuff. You are, you're part of a project, because normally interns are brought in because there's a project to be done, and their skills and their energy is needed. So you are going to serve the organization. You're going to do a much better job if you can. I'm not saying lose all interest in everything and just pick one particular thing, but from a kind of skill set, really understand, particularly in communications. As I mentioned, events. Is it user experience? Is it social media? If you're able to put sort of on a CV, or at least just sort of jotting down what it is you're good at and where you can bring the most value, that would be something that I would definitely encourage. I was fortunate that I did have a lot of interests, and but I was also quite busy. So I some experience in marketing, in events, and social media, and I was able to, during my time at the OECD, I was very fortunate to be able to kind of hone those skills and get into positions where I could really help my colleagues and support my colleagues and add value. That would be something that I would definitely encourage. Again, I'm not suggesting that you have to close off all interest in different things. But if you're interested in policy and trade, there's a particular area of trade. If you're in communications, what part of communications? And that will also, in my opinion, if you're connecting via LinkedIn or Twitter with individuals, it makes it a lot easier for them to understand and potentially help you. Because if you just come to them with vague interests of things you're interested in, that doesn't really do anything. But if you're, approaching them and connecting with them, and you have skills and you highlight those skills and those interests, they may know someone. They may be able to connect you with other people. They might be able to share with you opportunities, and you'll have a much better chance of getting that opportunity because you're suited for that position, and perhaps that person is sort of put in a word for you. So to kind of summarize, do your homework, understand the role of, for example, the OECD. What is our role? How are we made up? What is our purpose and mission? And how you might be able to support that in a communication field. Is it data, HTML, user experience, writing, press releases? Understand what you're good at, get it down, get it precise, and then go at it, because you will have a much more opportunities will arise that way than having a ton of interests but no real specific kind of key skills in a particular area. That would be my sort of overarching advice to anyone interested in pursuing careers, whether it's the OECD or in any other international organization.
Danny, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you to you and our friends at OECD for connecting with Black professionals in international affairs for this Career Talk series. How do you prefer to be reached or contacted for those who may want to try to follow up or connect with you on what platforms, or LinkedIn?
Sure, absolutely. So I think I'm connected via Instagram, so feel free to add me. I have very few followers, so anything to get the followers up is always good. I can also, my email as well is danny.ryan, so DANNY Ryan, RYAN, @OECD.org. On LinkedIn, it's Danny Ryan, OECD. Google Danny Ryan, OECD Washington Center. You'll find me. I'm always interested in connecting with new people, always happy to give advice and support young professionals as they start their journey. It's something that I was fortunate to have sort of in college, and also continue to have now. So I'm always willing to kind of support others in their ambitions to work, whether it be the OECD or working in international affairs.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you to all the viewers who have been watching today. This will be posted on our IGTV and our YouTube channel. So thank you for joining this call, and we look forward to seeing you all at future BPI chats.
Alexander, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, have a good day, everyone.